two or more friends who are talking about how they're never going to let anything bring them apart. They're always going to be together. They're always going to be that shoulder that you need to cry on. It's by Bruno Mars. You sing Count on Me for You Now.
If you ever find yourself stuck in the middle of the sea, I'd tell the world to find you. If you ever find yourself lost in the dark and you can't see, I'll be the light to guide you. Find out what we're made of when we are called to help our friends in need.
You can count on me like 1, 2, 3, I'll be there. And I know when I need it, I can count on you like 4, 3, 2, you'll be there. 'Cause that's what friends are supposed to do, yeah.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. You are true. truly in for a treat today. Our speaker is someone who has made a profound impact on FHS for more than 2 decades. In 1996, he was in the Who's Who Among American Teachers. In 2002, he was honored as the Rochester High School Chemistry Teacher of the Year. In 2006, he was the Crystal Apple Award winner. More recently, he was recognized as the New York State Teacher of the Year in 2008, and for his service to the local community in 2011. The son of 2 teachers, it seems as if he was born to do this job. He is one of the founders of Brotherhood, Sisterhood and the advisor to the Gay Straight Alliance. In many ways, he lives the ideals of this week all year long, constantly working to create a culture of care, both in his classroom and throughout the building. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce Fairport High School's most astute teacher, Mr. Rich Onyebane.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Dr. Jeffers and the Fairport Acapella Choir for that beautiful song. I'd like to thank Mrs. Bruton and Mrs. Horgan and Mrs. Capitelli and the 20 students who presented yesterday at 512 for an amazing day. I'd like to thank everyone that's had a chance to give in these red buckets over here. And if you haven't, you got 2 more days. We're hoping to get maybe $1 from everyone, because we've got 2 very important charities we're contributing to. And lastly, I'd like to thank some special guests who are here with me today. My front row, my friends, Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Scheibel, Mrs. Newcomb, my former student, now friend, Ray Scheibel, my aunt, Mrs. Marie Claus, and my partner of 16 years, Dr. Matt Fly. These people are part of my family, so I'm so grateful for their love and support. My brothers and sisters of Fairport, it is an honor to be with you today. 18 years ago, a small group of students and teachers created Brotherhood Sisterhood Week. Our goal was to make our large school feel a little bit smaller, a little bit kinder, a little bit more like a family. In order to make that goal concrete, we came up with the acronym CART. C for civility, A for awareness of others, R for respect, and T for tolerance. Over time, we raised our expectations and changed CART to care. Embracing differences requires more of us than tolerance. Our students and staff accepted this challenge and have made Fairport High School a very special place. 18 years ago, we took a risk. Not in my wildest dreams that I think we'd be this successful, or that New York would eventually pass a law, the Dignity for All Students Act, requiring all schools to talk about civility, awareness, respect, and embracing differences. We have so much to be proud of. Today, I'm going to share 4 stories from my life that demonstrate care. My hope is that these stories will encourage us to think, and that our thoughts will inspire us to act. If we want Fairport High School to feel like a family, then it is imperative that we act accordingly. Care is an action verb. My first story involves my family, which besides me includes my parents, my sister Beth, and my brother Chris. We lived in a suburb called Niskayuna, about 20 minutes west of Albany. Our home was in a part of town called Old Niskayuna, and was similar to homes in the village of Fairport. It was built around 1900. We had radiator heat, no central air. We had windows on ropes, about half of which opened. My parents were teachers at the time, and we didn't have a lot of money at the time, so we were the last family on the street with a black and white TV. We eventually upgraded to color TV when my grandparents gave us their old one. Then we were the last people on the street without cable. I share these details not to evoke pity. Rather, I share these details to show that there was nothing in the material trappings of our home that would draw people there. Yet our home was a people magnet. We were absolutely overflowing with people. And that's because my mom and dad had a generosity of spirit that is the defining characteristic of good families. Their love, kindness, and hospitality made everyone feel welcome. My neighborhood was loaded with kids. Adina Ravel lived next door, Becky and Rachel Esch in the house next to that, Greg and Mike, Chris and Eric Hope next to that, JP and Mike Egan across the street, Jeff and Eric Schufeld, Don and David Traskus. It was the type of neighborhood where the boys played touch football after school and everyone played capture the flag at night. It was a great place to grow up. And I'd be hard-pressed to think of a weekend from maybe 6th grade through high school where Beth, Chris, or I didn't have a friend sleep over. My parents welcomed our friends, so our house was a good place to be. When friends slept over, we would make popcorn in our snazzy electric popper. And kids, listen closely, this was so high-tech, you could take a chunk of butter, put it on top of the machine, and it would melt right onto the corn. I'm telling you, cutting-edge 1970s technology. Sometimes we'd sleep upstairs, but sometimes we'd sleep down in our basement, which we called the club. We had some grungy old couches down there and a turntable to play our 45s. Perhaps more important, we had a basement window that was just large enough to let an extra friend or two sneak in. And if you promise not to rat me out, I will confess that on some nights that aforementioned basement window was used to let the rest of us sneak out and roam the mean streets of Niskayuna, doing what my grandmother called shenanigans. I see we're familiar with the concept. As I grew older and began to see my friends' parents through adult eyes, I came to realize that many of them did not have the emotional skills to make their home welcoming to others. I didn't fully get that when I was your age, but life has taught me that not everyone's as naturally generous as my mom and dad. My mom taught English for 36 years at Siena College. Like all great teachers, she taught more than subject matter. She was a mentor, a mother, and a friend to students and colleagues alike. I could talk for hours about the students she welcomed into her home. There was Nancy, who was estranged from the family. There was Brian, who struggled with alcoholism and depression. There was Bridget, whose father never accepted her sexual orientation. If a student in her class was struggling, Mom welcomed them to our home because our family had love to share. Mom was equally caring with her colleagues. If a professor didn't have anywhere to go for Thanksgiving, they got an invite to our house. If someone was new to the faculty, or seriously ill, or recently divorced, they would get invites throughout the year to come to our house for dinner. My family's Italian, so we always had a ton of food anyway. And actually, a person or two at the table was not a big deal. As a kid, I loved meeting all these interesting people, but I didn't fully understand the depth of my mom's compassion. After 27 years of teaching, I get it now. My mom is one of those people who's aware, acutely aware of others. Whether through casual conversations or reading student journals or just observing the people around her, Mom innately knows when someone needs care. And here's where I get to be a grumpy old man for just a minute. I worry that the technology of today makes it harder to be aware of the people directly around us. Stand in the hallway when the bell rings and watch how many of us come pouring out of our classrooms like this. It's amazing there aren't more head-on collisions. Right? The person standing right next to us could literally be crying out for help, and most of us wouldn't even notice. We walk like this, we eat meals with other people like this, and even though we know we're not supposed to, we drive like this. Every minute that we spend texting or tweeting or updating Facebook or playing with our newest app, every minute is a minute that we are not aware of the people directly around us. Likewise, every minute we spend glued to our computer screens, even for the most professional of reasons, every minute is a minute that we're not fully engaged with the people nearby. I like my cell phone and my computer. They are powerful tools that make many jobs easier. But I worry that our digital addiction is making us more narcissistic and less aware of others. If we truly wish to be aware, it would behoove us to spend a little less time looking at screens and a little more time looking at people. That being said, awareness is only the first step. The next step is action. How many times have we seen a friend or classmate or colleague who's struggling and we say, boy, I really should do something to help that person, but today's not good because I got practice, and tomorrow's not good because I got work, and now I've forgotten completely. We live such busy lives that sometimes it feels like we don't have the time to care. I'll admit, there are a lot of days when I feel that way. And then I think of my mom, because she's someone who always makes the time to care. As I mentioned before, when I was your age, my family didn't have a lot of money, but we always had friendship to share. In my experience, that's usually enough to make a difference. Care is an action verb. The second story involves our entire Fairport family. To set the stage for this story, I'd have to talk a little about the transition that occurs to people in this building. We arrive here as sophomores or as new employees, and we meet a whole lot of people all at once. It can be a little overwhelming. They're strangers at first, but after a few weeks, they morph from strangers into teachers, students, classmates, and colleagues. Because we spend a lot of time here and the people are really nice, it doesn't take too much longer before we begin to start thinking of each other as friends. Over the years, we attend homecoming together, we eat lunch together, we share laughter, we share tears, and one day it hits us that these people right here have become a part of our family. And we can neither remember nor imagine life without them. And we love them dearly. And we love them dearly. Over the last 8 months, we've lost 2 cherished members of our family, Heather Boyer and Blake Cognata. The details of their deaths are well known, so I won't dwell on them here. Suffice it to say that each was horrific in its own particular way. And for both, what followed can only be described as a tsunami of care. My story focuses on Heather because there's been more time since her loss to process and reflect. But the theme of the story applies equally well to Blake. I found out about Heather about 11 in the morning on Sunday, July 29th. By noon, my phone was exploding with calls, emails, texts. I could barely keep up. Shoddy Miles called and said, Mr. O, I just heard about Mrs. Boyum. My friends and I want to have a fundraiser for our kids. Ashley Timmons texted me with a very similar message. Reed DeRozier, former senior class president, sent an email from Cornell. Said, Mr. O, my sister and I are starting a memory book so that Mrs. Boyum's children will have stories to remember her by. On Sunday night, science teachers gathered in my home to console one another. Mr. Tiberio stopped by, and he brought a pizza. And he said, Rich, I don't know that anyone's going to be hungry, but I just wanted to do something. Mr. Campana took out a wad of cash and said, this is to buy flowers for the funeral. If there's anything left over, just give it to her kids. Mr. Ackles, Mr. Clare, and Mrs. Larson all came by to give hugs and provide comfort. Later that night, hundreds of kids went up to the hillside for a beautiful candlelight tribute. Over the next few days, Mrs. DeChick and Mrs. Marshall worked with the Boyums to make sure that their needs were being met. Mrs. Steffer and Mrs. Bantle set up a schedule for meals to be delivered to their home. Mr. Fantagrossi came to calling hours. He wasn't even our principal yet. Mrs. Russell down in the computer lab did a million things to help out because Mrs. Russell always does a million things to help out. As I reflect on these altruistic acts, what strikes me is that everyone I mentioned was grieving, but their first response was, what can I do to help others? What can I do to help others? And that was a fitting response because it perfectly reflected the life of Heather Boyer. On Thursday morning, Tim Kenny said that Mrs. Boyer helped them through Honors Chem and AP Bio. Taylor DeRozier said at the funeral that Mrs. Boyer inspired her in high school and continued to be her friend in college and med school. Then, in an act of courage and kindness that I will never forget, Mrs. Eldred, Mrs. Himmelberg, and Mr. Johnson sang If I Die Young by the band Perry. The song had been requested by the Boyer family. For the first few verses, I wept uncontrollably because the sadness of the lyrics captured the feeling of the day. The sharp knife of a short life was painful indeed. I was sitting towards the front of church, and when I turned to grab some Kleenex, for the first time I took in the overflowing crowd that had filled St. John's of Rochester. People were standing wall to wall. Directly around me were 30 science teachers, some current, some retired, some recently laid off. Over to my right were rows of students and alumni. In the center, I saw teachers, secretaries, administrators, custodians, board members, people representing every part of our Fairport family. And as I took in this overflowing crowd, two thoughts entered my mind. The first thought was, this enormous crowd is a beautiful tribute to our dear friend Heather. And the second thought turns out to be the same thought Blake shared in his final tweet. The second thought was, I am so very fortunate to be part of the Fairport family. And then the tears returned. But this time, they were tears of gratitude for the myriad acts of kindness that helped our family to heal. Care, most assuredly, is an action verb. The third story involves my students from last year. On May 26, 2012, my partner Matt and I were married in a small ceremony in our backyard. My friend Mr. Baines over here officiated the ceremony. Mr. Tiberio played some music. It was a really good day. It was good for the usual reasons, like celebrating love and being with friends and family. It was also good because Matt and I were both part of a long civil rights struggle to win marriage equality. As the day approached, I shared the news with my colleagues, and they were universally supportive. I planned on telling my students, but every time I got close, I found a reason not to say it. Then, one day, I had an epiphany. The reason I was stalling is that I was a little afraid of how my students might respond. Though they all knew Matt, not everyone's comfortable with gay people getting married. I was particularly worried about how the boys in my class might react. Then, I had a second epiphany. My fear had nothing to do with my students. They were wonderful kids who had given me great love and respect throughout the year. No, my fear had nothing to do with them. My fear had to do with me. It's part of the baggage I carried from my youth. These days, I'm a fairly confident person, but when I was your age, I was terrified that people wouldn't like me if they found out who I really was. In 1981, that was not an unreasonable hypothesis. The fear stayed with me through college and early into my teaching career. The fact that I was a science major and socially awkward didn't help. And yes, with apologies to my department, I will concede that socially awkward chemistry major is probably redundant. But I digress. Anyway, I spent a lot of time trying to hide who I was and worrying about what other people would think. Over time, I eventually came out to my family, my friends, and eventually my students. I became happier and much more confident. But a little kernel of fear always remains. On Tuesday, May 22nd, I shared the news with my first period physics class, and they literally stood at their desks and cheered. Compared to the snoring one usually hears in first period physics, that was a joyful sound indeed. When the bell rang at the end of class, I had to walk down to the main office. And as I'm walking down the hall, 20 different kids came up. Mr. O, congratulations, I heard the good news. That was surprising to me because these were not my students. Then it dawned on me that someone from first period had tweeted the information. And word spread like wildfire through the Fairport cloud. By 8th period chemistry, I really didn't have to tell anyone, but I did, and they clapped nonetheless. The next day, Claire Sabatine brought me a card and a Mylar balloon that said congratulations. Jay Wagner and Jackson Bloom pulled me aside in class and said, Mr. O, are you getting excited? Because we're really excited for you. That whole week was filled with students giving me kind words, hugs, and high fives. It was unbelievable. And I know that to the students, those little acts of embracing me did not seem like much. But I can assure you, it meant the world to me. It meant the world to me. In a few months, I'll be celebrating my 50th birthday. Yeah, you can clap for that. Matt, can we invite them to the party? Okay, we'll need more cake. Thank you. One thing I've learned in my half-century is that everyone carries a little kernel of fear. We all have moments of self-doubt. We all have something that makes us feel different. Perhaps it's race, or religion, or academic ability. Perhaps it's body image, or poverty, or lack of athletic prowess. Perhaps it's anxiety, or depression, or an unusual family situation. Humans are social animals, and we all desire to fit in. I want everyone to take a minute right now, and I want you to think about a time in your life when you worried about being accepted by others. Maybe you were new to Fairport. It was the first day of school. Maybe you were the only sophomore on a varsity team full of seniors. Maybe you were the only person of color in a predominantly white elementary classroom. Maybe you were the only family on your street that worshiped at a synagogue or mosque. Now, I want you to think about someone who helped you get past that fear. What did that person do to make you feel welcome? When was the last time you did that for someone else? Care is an action verb. The last story involves my nephew Evan and my friend Mike. Evan is currently a 9th grader, and I know I'm biased because he's family, but he really is a spectacular young man. When he was a baby, he would get so excited at the sight of other people. that a smile would come over his face and his arms would make a little flapping motion like this. It was unbelievably cute. Sometimes I think the world would be a better place if we all got that excited at the sight of others. OMG, it's Mrs. Priel. Why, look up yonder, it's John Paul Scott. When Evan got older and learned to walk, his favorite game became airplane. He would stand with his arms like this, and I would lie on my back, grab his arms, and use my feet to lift him high into the air. We would play for hours until I was physically exhausted, and then he'd cry and beg for more. As he got older, our activities expanded to include wiffle ball, knee hockey, Uno, and frequent trips to McDonald's. I loved every minute of it. I'm not sure where the time goes, but suddenly that adorable little boy has broad shoulders and a deep voice. And if we were to play airplane today, he'd be the one doing the lifting. Mike was a year behind me in college. He was handsome, charming, quite the ladies' man. He was a raconteur, could hold people rapt with his stories. He was also involved in our theater program. At the time, Mike was more of an acquaintance than a friend. You see, he was an English major, and he was one of those students that my mom helped out. When we graduated from Siena, Mike became an English teacher, and I became a science teacher. Mike coached baseball, and I coached soccer. He lived near my family, so our paths continued to cross, and our friendship grew deeper with time. When he fell in love with Donna, I got invited to their wedding. When they had their kids, first Cole, then Izzy, we celebrated. Over the years, I've come to value Mike for his strong intellect, his rapier-like wit, and his kindness. When Cole was little, he did not easily engage with other people. He separated his foods by color. He fixated on certain activities, all telltale signs of a child on the autism spectrum. Doctors eventually suggested Asperger's syndrome. For those unfamiliar with the condition, people on the autism spectrum have normal intelligence, sometimes above normal intelligence, but they struggle with social skills because they don't always pick up on body language or facial expression or tone of voice, all the subtle ways we use to communicate emotion. As you can imagine, that difficulty causes a certain amount of social anxiety and can make forming friendships difficult. Last summer, I hosted a pizza party at my sister's house, and I invited Mike's family to join us. When they arrived, Cole was holding a football, which surprised me at first because he had never shown any interest in sports. But there it was, so I said, Cole, let's go play catch. And we tossed for a while in the backyard. And at one point, I dropped the pass, and he looked at me rather indignantly and said, Rich, when the ball is above your waist, you make a diamond with your hands like this. But when the ball is below your waist, you touch your pinkies together like this. Apparently, I had been doing it wrong. He really was into football. When the pizza came, I grabbed Mike and said, Mike, what's the deal? He said, Rich, Cole came home from middle school one day, and he said, Dad, I need a confidence booster. I think I'm going to try out for football next year. Then maybe the other kids will like me better. Wow. The brutal honesty of that statement takes a few minutes to sink in. Mike, being a great dad, said, well, of course, Cole. And he called some teacher friends, and he got Cole signed up for football camp at Union College. And while there's probably no risk of anyone confusing Cole with Eli Manning, it was clear to me that his skills and his confidence had improved. After dinner, Evan arrived home with his friends Tyler and Chris. Evan is a world-class athlete. He plays soccer, hockey, baseball, and lacrosse. Since age 5, he's been an all-star in every sport. He's also good-looking and socially gifted. In short, he's one of the popular kids. Cole is a quiet kid trying to fit in. In most situations, two kids like that would not interact. But as I said before, Evan's really an amazing young man. He immediately set up a touch football game with Tyler and Chris on one team, Evan and Cole on the other. They played for about an hour, and I don't know who won, but every time I looked into the yard, I saw four boys who were laughing and smiling and having a good time. At the end of the night, Mike pulled me aside and said, "Rich, your nephew is amazing. Cole doesn't usually play with other kids like that. This is big." Now, I'm always a proud uncle, but I don't know that I've ever been more proud than that particular moment. Evan showed care in action. But that's not the end of the story. You see, Cole isn't the only one who struggles at school. When Evan was little, and I'd read to him, he mixed up his letters, B's and D's, P's and Q's, the telltale signs of a child with a reading disability. As he got older, he could memorize chunks of words, but his reading was still choppy and his comprehension poor. In elementary school, his teachers gave him extra help and then enrolled him in a summer program cleverly called Reading Camp. Mrs. Smith knows about that. In middle school, his teachers got him a 504 plan for additional support. He would go to school early, 2 days a week, for one-on-one help with his teachers, and then he'd stay after school on other days just to do homework. His teachers were phenomenal. They really went the extra mile. But even with phenomenal teachers, I know that high school will be hard for Evan. When Mike's family left, I joked with my sister that perhaps Cole and Evan should play together more often. Evan could help Cole with sports, and Cole could help Evan with reading. We laughed, but underneath the laughter was an unspoken wish that we could alleviate their struggles. Evan and Cole are beautiful young men who will rely on the kindness of others. I hope and pray that they get it. Many of us here today identify with Cole. We know what it's like to need a confidence boost. We know what it's like to hope that one of the popular kids might ask us to play, or to sit at their lunch table, or to just hang out. Likewise, many of us here today identify with Evan. We know what it's like to struggle with reading, or math, or passing Regents exams. We know what it's like to hope that some teacher will go the extra mile to help us succeed. In the end, we all rely on the kindness of others. Care is an action verb. My brothers and sisters, I am so proud to be a part of the Fairport family. The care that you've shown me this morning is both noted and appreciated. I hope that my words have encouraged us to think, and that our thoughts will inspire us to act. To the students, I'll say that high school goes by quickly. From sophomore year to graduation, you have about 600 days in this building. And yes, I know some days seem to drag, but just ask a senior how fast the time goes by. To the staff, I'll say that the journey from rookie to retiree is equally fast. And along that journey, life provides poignant reminders that our time is finite. So here's my challenge to all of us. In the time we have together, let's do something to make our school a better place. Reach out to someone who is lonely. Become an assets leader or a student ambassador. Invite someone new to sit at a lunch table. Comfort someone who is grieving. Give a confidence boost to someone who feels left out. Try just one more time to teach that kid who's struggling. Tell a secretary or a custodian or a lunch lady that we appreciate their efforts. Embrace someone who seems different from us. If we can find it in our hearts to accept this challenge, and our Fairport family will grow even stronger. Care is an action verb. I love you guys. Thank you very much.
Rich, thank you so much for your words. Not only were they insightful, they were inspiring as well. A couple of reminders before we leave today. We have a couple of days left in Brotherhood Sisterhood Week. One of the things we try to accomplish throughout this week is providing for charities that we believe in. And so you'll have multiple opportunities to donate. Please think about that and take advantage of those opportunities, including when you leave today. In addition, when you leave today, please be careful. I know we want to get to where we want to get to fast, but we need to be safe as well. I appreciate the work of the acapella choir today. They did a wonderful job. Thank you. And lastly, I will say thank you to everyone in attendance today. Anytime you can take 2,000 people and put them into a gymnasium and ask them to sit quietly for 35 minutes, regardless of how good the storyteller is, that takes a lot of self-discipline, takes a lot of respect. And for that, I could not be prouder of you. So with no further ado, people on this side, please exit out those doors. People on this side, out those doors. Have a great day.